Hi, I'm Toth-Smith, and I'm going to show you how to make a cloth mask out of a ordinary bed sheet, a fitted bed sheet. And so what you want to do is you want to gather your equipment first, and what you kind of need is an average bed sheet. You want to have it, you want to look for the elastic on the sheet, and in this case it's a little bit bigger. It's generally better if you have elastic that's a little bit smaller, because it's much easier to fit around your ear. You know, when the mask is put on, you're going to have these elastic ear parts go over your ear, and this is basically how the mask will end up looking. For today, we're going to be using elastic that's a little bigger. It's kind of easier to see in the process. And even with a little bigger elastic, you still can use it. You may want to make your elastic ears a little bit wider and longer so that they fit a little more comfortably. So what you're going to do too is assemble your other equipment that you're going to need. And you want to have your sewing. All you're going to need is of course your thread. You're going to need needles. You want to have a piece of cardboard that's long enough to draw your lines on your fabric. I encourage you to have use a magic marker to draw your lines on your fabric, but you want to use one that's not too dark because you don't want it to show through. You need to have a good sharp scissor, one that can cut fabric easily, and then you want to, of course, have your ruler, and you want to have a tape measure. So why don't we go ahead and start. So I'm going to move it over. The first thing you do is you want to cut the elastic out of your fabric, and out of your sheet, I should say, sorry. What you want to do is you want to get pretty close to where the seam is, but you don't want to cut the seam because you're going to really use that seam to keep it together. You're not going to want to have that damaged in any way. So I cut it a little bit bigger to begin with, and then once it's all cut out, I spend time and I just make it a little bit neater. So you want to cut all of the elastic out of the fabric, and you also want to cut, if your fabric has a seam, this makes really nice ties if you want to do ties instead of the elastic behind your ears. So now we're going to cut out our pattern. What you want to do is you want to find a very flat spot of your fabric. In this case, I've already cut some out of this fabric, but we'll do another cutout. So what you're wanting to do is, our fabric size is going to be, actually here it is, it's 11 by 16 inches. And what I do is I use my tape measure, and I put a lot of dots on my fabric, and you can measure out your fabric so that you could get the most out of it, and that you can be very creative doing it. But what I do is I first measure out 16 inches by putting a few dots here, and then another 16 inches. Let me first do my 11 because then it makes it a little bit straighter and easier. So what you want to do is you want to measure your 11 inches, which is that. And you want to do the same thing over here, 11 inches, and I try to go on the edge so that it, that's actually 11 there. And then I take my cardboard and I draw a line so it's easier to cut out. And then you can actually take your ruler, and it makes it a little bit straighter. Until you get your rectangle. And you'll be able to measure this out in your own time so that you can get more out of your sheet. And then you want to start cutting. And of course, yeah, here's the good scissor. And you just want to basically cut along the seam, and everybody kind of knows how to do that. It's pretty easy to cut fabric. So to preserve time, I have a pre-cut piece here. So this is what it's going to look like when you've cut it out. It's a rectangle. And what you're going to want to do, this is the front side and this is considered the back side. So you're wanting to iron down 3/4 of an inch on the back side. And you want to do it on both sides of the fabric. And I kind of eyeball it. You can actually use the tape measure if you want to. It's about 3/4 of an inch. And I iron the whole piece out. And then what you're going to want to do is, this is where we do our sewing. So you want to have your piece matched together. And the kind of seam we're going to do, the kind of sewing we're going to do is called a back stitch. A back stitch is a really strong stitch. It's kind of the stitch that you do for hemming. And I always think it's a little bit easier if you make a line, especially for this when you're going to be stitching something that's this important. This is one of the areas that need to have a lot of stability. So what you want to do is you want to take your stitch and you want to start underneath. Okay, and now the back stitch is just what it is. You're going backwards and you're coming forward underneath the initial puncture you've done. And sometimes this thread gets a little funny, so you have to take your time. It's easier when you're home and it's all quiet and peaceful. And then you go back, and that's how it gets its name, because you're going backwards. And then you're going to surface in front of your stitch. And it kind of will form a little line eventually when you're done. So you want to keep going. And when I do the back stitch, because this is going to be such a stable part of your mask, you really want it to be durable. And so I go about an inch or close to an inch, and I make a lot of knots when I'm sewing. And the reason I do that is because if your thread breaks anywhere along the seam, it could come apart. And so if you have a lot of knots in your with your thread, if any part of the thread breaks, it'll still stay together. And you want to, I think it's easier to put the work in while you're making it instead of having to repair things. So, and this is going to get a lot of wash because you're going to be putting it in the machine in between wearing it, a lot of wash. So you want to make it as strong as you can. So now as you keep going with the back stitch, you're seeing how it's creating this line. And what I do is I do the whole back stitch all the way across, and then I turn around and go back again over what I've just done. And you're sort of getting a double stitch. And this is basically what it'll look like when you're done, because you're gonna go all the way across, you're gonna turn around, and then you're gonna stitch back. So and I have at least 4 or 5 knots all the way through the thread there and 4 or 5 knots back. So you end up with this really strong seam, and see, you could see it. I mean, it'll withstand a lot of use. And so what you want to do now is you turn it inside out when you're done, and now you need to iron it. And this is where you're going to be putting in your pleats. And that's, we're going to be creating this part right here. And first I iron it down really, really well, so it's easier to work with. And you want to do what I call the nose part. So you want to make it at least about an inch, depending on your nose, or you want to make it less or more. But usually about an inch to an inch and a half is a good way to start there, because this is really the part that's going to go over your nose. I don't know if you saw that, but this will go over. And then you want to do 2 other pleats to make a total of 3. So you make your second pleat and you iron it down. And then you have your third pleat. And actually when you do your third pleat, you really want to make sure it's ironed down a lot, because that's going to be what you're going to be sewing. So let me go ahead and do that real quick. You got to watch your fingers. I actually wear a Band-Aid as a thimble so that I don't stick myself. And you do stick yourself, let me tell you. Unfortunately. So you could turn the iron off now. That's all the ironing we're going to be doing. So basically what you end up with is, this is the finished product. So you see you end up with having it be the same way. And now what we're going to do is we tack these specific areas. And you could kind of see the tacks in here, and you could see the tacks in here. Basically we tack the pleats down. And normally when you tack anything in sewing, you're going to be removing it. But in this case, the tacking is going to be stabilizing the mask. So what you want to do is, we'll start on the back side, is you want to come through the heavy part of the fabric. We might as well start here. And you're going to want to, let's start on the other side, because you want to go through the thickest part of the fabric where you've bent over the other part to add some stability, to make it, when you're washing it, it won't come loose and come out, because you're actually not really hemming it. So you want to provide a tack. And tacks are just, just sort of straight stitching. And what I do is I put a lot of knots in it. And here I'll put a knot in this one to show you. Because it's going to be a foundation for the mask. It sort of adds it a little bit of strength. But let me cut this off. Grab another string. And then you want to do a second. You want to do it on all 4 areas here, because it's got to add stability to this whole section. So you're go ahead and you stick it in. And then you're going to go back through. And it's basically just a regular stitch. You can do a second one on the same one if you want, depending on how strong you want to make it. And so what I've done is I've done 2 now, and then I would do another one and maybe one other one down here, because there's a second spot. But to save time, I'm not going to go through all that. Let me just X this off, and I'm going to tie a little knot up here, because it makes it easier for me to not have to knot everything 100 times. Okay, so basically this is what it is. This is how it's going to look when you're done. See, you'll have all these different stability points here. I mean, it's strong, but it's not as strong as it needs to be. So now we're going to end up putting a seam here underneath our darts. And the easy part about this is that you don't have that really thick fabric now. You basically have, you're going to be sewing into the thinner part of the fabric, which is a lot easier than having to go through 4 pieces of fabric. And you're going to do the back stitch again. This one may be a little easier to see. What you're going to do is you start out with your knot, and you go back and then forward, and then you go back again. And I try to make it a specific line. I think it just looks nicer and it's a little stronger. And of course, what you're going to do is you go, take your time, you go all the way across through all the different fabric. And you want to put a lot of knots. I believe so much in knotting things as you go, because again, if the thread breaks in anywhere on your piece, it won't fall apart. So I would do a knot even 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch in. And on a thicker area, I'll double the knot. It's just easy to do, and it just provides that extra strength. So as you're going across, you're putting in your back stitch. And I could go on and on, because but I don't want to take too much time away from the video. But I think you're getting the point of it. And I'm also going to have a diagram in the video of the actual back stitch, so you could see how you're doing it. It's kind of a sketch. So it forms kind of a line, and you can see over here one that's already done. And of course, the same thing you did when you created this connection here is you want to go all the way across and turn around and go all the way back. you want to double this stitch, because this is one of the strongest part of your mass right here. So this has to hold up. And so of course I'm not going to continue on, but that's what I would have gone all the way over and making a bunch of knots in between. Like here it would have been another knot, you know, to add that additional stability. So when you're done, you're going to end up with this. This has your darts in it, you know, the stay stitch, and it's also going to have your back stitch. So now we're going to go ahead and put in the your elastic and or your ties. Okay, so what you want to do now is you want to grab your, you've cut this off your fabric and your fitted sheet, and hopefully you've gone down and you've cut off any of the extra edges just to make it look a little nicer. And of course, this is a thicker piece. You'd want to use something between 7-8 inches because it's a thicker one. The thinner one, you only need to use about 6.5 or 7 inches because it has much less space. You could see the difference. So what you want to do when you're sewing it is you go in between the pocket here, and you're going to put your put it in about a 1/2 inch. You don't with it being so thick, you don't have to put it in so far because you're going to be stitching this a lot. I try to keep all the knots on the same side just so it looks better. And of course you're going to be using white fabric, white thread, because you don't want it to look like that. You really want to hide your stitching. You know, they're not that beautiful, but they do the job. So you want to make sure you always use the same color as your material thread. Otherwise you'll be able to see the stitching that you do, which I don't know, maybe you'll get really good at it and not have to worry. And again, I do the same thing. I put a lot of knots here because this is an area that you want it to be extra strong. It's going to take a lot of punishment when you're putting it on and off your face, and also you're going to be washing it a lot. And so I basically go back and forth and knot and go back and forth again. And you want to do it at least 10 times or more because of how strong you want it. And this is the white fabric, but you could see I've done this at least 10 times, and I've probably put about 7 knots in it. So you really want it strong. And so when you're done, you just take the other side and you put it into the other end of it, and you sew that down, and you have your ear loop. I'm not going to do that because we don't have a lot of time. And I'm just going to show you this. I'm not going to sew it. It's the same way as you've sewn this one, but you're going to put your ties. If you just want to have 2 ties, you just stick it all the way in, and you just do the same stitching that you did on this one, and it creates a really, really strong, and here you can see that I've already sewn these ties in. So you could put ties and have 2 ties here, and then you could hook it in the back, or you could take the elastic from your fitted sheet and have it for your ears. And I think that's pretty much everything I'm going to do, and I just wanted to leave you with my mask on so you can be excited to do it. But these are very, very comfortable, and they fit over the N95s. They'll fit over a surgical mask, or you could just wear it like it is, and they're washable. I would probably wash it in a hand wash it, but you could also probably put it in the machine. You just you'd want to make sure it doesn't get caught on anything. So I wanted to end this, and thank you for tuning in, and I hope this helps you get through the pandemic.